Hey, well, thank you all very much for joining us today. I am really thrilled to be able to talk a little bit about impact investing and the work that we're doing to bring together impact investors and the MDI space. I'm joined on this panel, starting on the far end, Ray Ramsey. He's the CEO of the Nathan Cummings Foundation. The Nathan Cummings Foundation is perhaps the most forward-leaning, racial equity-focused foundation in the country. We also have Zoila Jennings, who is the lead impact investing officer for the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. In that role, she brings the resources and sophistication of decades of experience and the balance sheet and expertise of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation to bear to support the work of organizations like MDIs and others. And lastly, we're joined by Marcus Martin, who is the head of ESG advisory and digital assets at US Bank. So please join me in welcoming this fantastic panel. So for those of you who may not know me, I'm Chris White. I'm the Deputy Executive Director of the National Bankers Foundation. That's the 501c3 sister to the 97-year-old trade association, the NBA. During that century of history, there have been moments of collaboration between foundations and investors who are interested in doing good with their dollars. However, as we know, in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd, there was a significant outpouring of resources, both from foundations and corporations and others. And now we've seen that there's a backlash where there's, as many of the panels today and during this conference highlighted, there's been sort of a pendulum swing back the other direction. We also know that in this moment around greenhouse gas reduction fund opportunities, our banks are interested, just like many investors are, in collaborating through capital and partnerships to drive green financing into the communities that we all serve. However, again, we know that there's an ESG backlash. And so one of the questions that we've been exploring at the NBAF is how do we create permanent sources of funding that can align investors with the work of MDIs in a way that's sustainable and scalable and enduring. All right, so we're joined on the stage by folks who think much more broadly about the role of investing than many of their peers in other institutions. When we were first preparing for this panel, I was very focused on the climate opportunity. I kept saying climate, climate, climate. And both Marcus and Ray and Zoila said, look, climate justice is important, but it's more about justice than it is about climate, right? And so the question became, how do we leverage this moment of attention on climate to create structures, relationships, and paradigms that can advance justice, not just in climate, but across housing, education, healthcare, the arts, small business, all of the things that you folks do every day. And so the purpose of this panel is to talk a little bit about the work that we're doing to connect the MDI sector, which we all know and love, with the impact investing space, which for many people is quite new. Many folks are like, what is an impact investor? You know, what does that actually mean? And so what I'd like to do is actually ask Ray and then Zoila, if you guys wouldn't mind talking a little bit about the impact investing space and in particular how your organizations pursue that.
Ladies first. You want to go first? You want me? Oh, she wants me. All righty. Happy to go first. You know, when Chris asked me to come, I was trying to say no, not because I don't like you, but because I said I need to be sitting there so that I can learn. So I'll do the best that I can to explain a few things, but a lot of it is going to be speaking from the perspective as a foundation and what we're looking to do. But the thing to remember is we're an institution that wants to get money out. So we sincerely want to get the money out. And so the more I learn about the places where that capital could go, then it creates possibilities. So the issue is impact. I hate these new catchy phrases because this concept has been around for a while. It's been called many different things. over the years, but the new term is impact. So I'm going to try to unpack that term a little bit. It mostly starts from the standpoint of, in addition to a financial return, what is the social return? And having clarity about having a social return. So in our organization, we've created this document that's called Diligence and Analysis. So you all know diligence. And in the analysis, we're looking for what's the social impact return. And what we look at is what you're proposing. Is it causally connected to the outcomes that we're seeking? And is it plausible to pull off? If it is, we're going to try to find a way to work with you. And so for us, we've tried to narrow that word a little bit to three things: racial, economic, environmental justice. So it's broad enough to be able to do a lot of different things. And I've been at the foundation for a few years, and one of the things I did was I said, I want to get out of the how business. We should be in the what business, articulating what we're looking for, like racial, economic, and environmental justice, providing you with clarity. So if you go to our website, I think you'll see the focus areas very clear. And then the how is up to you. And because we're not the expert, and that's what I meant by sitting there. And so I never put us in position like, oh, I'm the expert on this topic or that topic. And what we want are creative people coming forward with different ideas about how to use capital. So we've recently launched program-related investment program. A lot of foundations have those. This is well below market capital. I hate saying the return that we're looking for because sometimes I'd like to do better, but we've pegged ours at 2%. So we're able to activate 2% money and work with people, and really the goal is return of capital. So we're not trying to maximize return with that particular resource. We also activate our endowment. So foundations have endowments. We have a return that we have to get, but that's well below what private equity and other players are looking for. So we have the flexibility to work with people in different ways. One last thing, and then I'll turn it over, that I look for in impact. The most important thing is that it's authentic. Because I see people all the time, you hear greenwashing and other things, so they'll slap a label on it and they'll walk in and say, I'm an impact investor. And I look for what I call the 4 Ps when I'm analyzing the organization. The first, who are the people? So you kind of look at who the people are and who you intend to serve. The second P is, what are the policies of the organization? Are they aligned with what you say your purpose is? And then there's, what are your practices? Because you could have great policies, but your practices stink. And the last one is power. How do we talk about power? Who has it? Who benefits? Who governs? And those are all critical issues. So I don't think you can really be an authentic impact entity without really spending time with the 4 Ps. Can unpack that a little bit later, but that's a quick overview of impact.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Ray. Zoila.
Yeah, I think if I would add anything, it's that if you think about a foundation's business model, how they exist, so they basically have a large endowment, that's the corpus, and then legally, they have to give 5% of that endowment in grants. That's the business model. And a lot of the times, endowments are not impact first. In fact, they are highly return-seeking, and historically, they've been highly return-seeking in order to make more grants. And so in 2020, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation said, well, what about the middle? What if we did have investments that were actually impact first, that furthered our mission? The good thing, the catch, the interesting part is that the investments, particularly program-related investments, actually count towards our payout. So they're treated as grants from the IRS perspective. So if we have losses, they're actually treated as grants. And that means we can be very risk tolerant. And so I'm not necessarily thinking about returns in the same way. We think about it as total return. Am I taking good risk? Am I debunking perceived risk? Am I getting a reasonable return in order to be able to recycle back capital? And that's, I think this conversation is really about philanthropy and impact investing, and that's really what we bring to the table. So in 2020, our team was started with $625 million of capital. We have half deployed that, and one of our key strategies is around community development. And I think it's important to note, we're a health-focused foundation, and people are always like, oh, healthcare. No, health outcomes. And only 20% of health outcomes are actually driven by clinical care. The other 80% are driven by economic determinants of health, social determinants of health, environmental determinants of health. And so that's why we're here, because MDIs have a really critical role to play in health outcomes. And in 2021, we deployed $35 million in deposits to 7 MDIs. And that was one of the first things we did when we got our allocation, because it felt like an easy thing to do. And I think some of the learnings with those deposits is that we're facing very big economic shifts. So when we placed the deposits in late 2021, nobody would pick up our call because deposits were not what we needed at the time. It was equity investments. Then ESIP comes around, and then all of a sudden deposits are back. And so I think we're facing another tectonic plate in terms of the economic shifts in our landscape, where we're wondering, and I think this is the question for the panel, what's next? What is the thing that's gonna further the industry?
Well, Zoila, thank you for that. And Ray, thank you for your insights and the way that you structured everything. Out of curiosity, who's just learned something new? Right. Yeah. So you're all experts in the MDI space. We're all learning new things about the foundation and impact investing space. I'm going to an event later this month where the room's going to be the opposite. They're all going to be experts in impact investing and foundations. They're not going to know anything about MDIs. These are two universes that really don't intersect and have not done so in a structured and scalable way. So the purpose of today's panel was really to talk about an initiative that we've been working on, and that we're launching an initiative. We're not launching a bond, we're launching a racial equity bond initiative. So apparently there's a technical meaning that, if I say it the wrong way, attorneys will come up and tackle me because there's security law involved. But we're joined today by Marcus Martin, who has been an amazing thought partner in helping us think through what it's going to take in order to create sustainable, scalable conduits of funding between capital markets, impact investors, MDIs, and the communities we serve. All right, so this is potentially that next thing, Zoila, that you highlighted. How do we create sustainable, durable, scalable relationships where we're bridging investors and communities in the pursuit of justice? All right, that's really what this is about. And we think that these bonds, these MDI equity bonds, which will probably change to MDI Justice Bonds because of the current combat happening over language. Nobody can be against justice. But would love, Marcus, if you could talk a little bit about how we're thinking through the opportunities and to the extent that you can, what we're working on.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. And thank you to Ray and Zoila. Some of you maybe have heard of these racial equity bonds that we started this program about 4 years ago. Simply put, racial equity bonds, and we're still calling them that, by the way. Well, we don't call them anything. Let me back up. We just serve the client. So I work at an investment bank. I work in capital markets. My partner, Adedeji, is sitting right there. And we spend our time trying to solve the challenges for clients. So on a day-to-day basis, we might be dealing with high-grade corporates and others. But our team has pivoted aggressively to focus on the intersection between impact and capital markets, or we would call it impact capital markets, to overuse the term impact. But what does that mean? Well, from our perspective, what we do is things like if there is a cap on LIHTC, but we need more affordable or attainable housing, how do we accelerate that process and bring more capital into the challenge to solve for housing? So we've issued, I can't quote the number, some of it's public, some of it's private, but well over $500 million of these types of instruments. These are securities. So what happens is you effectively are looking to get some form of a credit enhancement. There's multiple ways to do that. You bring that credit enhancement into the vehicle, let's call it, and that vehicle now has a credit rating. Many of the MDIs in this audience, many nonprofits, many of those that we know who are doing great work are just not at a capacity or scale to go get a public rating. or even a private rating, and you might not necessarily be looking to issue debt in a security form. But what happens when you bring the right types of partners to the table, well-intentioned corporates, others, and in this instance, as we're talking about and thinking about more generally, to Ray's point about the Ps, the 4 Ps, who are the right people that you're talking to for these credit enhancers to actually create the bond model that can be issued to the general public? So if you get into a scenario like most of our racial equity bonds where they're investment grade rated, in all actuality, at that point, pretty much any investor will buy them. The question back to Ray's, the point back to Ray's question is, who can you sell these to that are equally as intentioned, so that we can create the economic, development on the back end? Those who are well-intentioned don't just want to know that you put the money out the door. They need to understand where it went to and what the actual impact metrics look like in those projects. And I'm not talking about, I'm not going to call out a corporate, but we've seen green bonds and all types of. Typically, you just have to be aligned with where the eligible category of allocation or investment is. In these racial equity bonds or in these MDI Justice Bonds, it's several layers below. So it's not just about making sure the capital gets to the MDIs and gets down to the project level, but there's also data, metrics from each one of those projects that are both financially important and, to the analytical point, from an impact perspective, they have to actually be real and they have to be authentic and effective. So we've worked through this model with a whole host of partners. I think in this current environment, one of the benefits that the MBA has is being a partner to the Justice Climate Fund. I think everyone's aware that the Justice Climate Fund received a very handsome grant, but frankly it was smaller than what was expected. And so now you have incredible organizations like the MBA Foundation looking to support the MDIs in their pursuit for climate lending. The problem is if you don't have OpEx, and if you don't have the ability to scale your own capacity, you're obviously unable to, it's the classic put your oxygen mask on. So about 9, 12, 10 months ago, we set out to try to figure out how we could structure a model to get the OpEx to MBA so that they could play the requisite role for MDIs to push this capital into the communities. We've iterated on a few different models, but just suffice to say, we're very comfortable with where things are now. The 4 Ps are starting to line up, and what ultimately this will I don't want to predict anything, but what this should look like is any old investment grade bond that's issued to the market. Obviously the difference is we're capturing data all the way down to the project level. So ultimately that means you can tap into the capital markets, which is anywhere between 75 to 100x in terms of daily liquidity versus some of the traditional marketplaces you have to go to find liquidity. Last point is, if this model works properly, what will ultimately happen is a series of traditional investment grade investors, these investment managers, some are impact related, some are not, they're ultimately going to have access and visibility to the asset class that are the MDIs. And I think that's the critical point. So we love the idea that this climate alignment fits, but frankly, from my perspective, it's certainly speaking on behalf of those who are doing this, it's an accelerant to justice. And we're able to ultimately use a lot of the proceeds in something like this to directly support the MDI sector, the members of this MBA incredible organization, but do it in a way where it's almost like they're acting like their own sports league. We all know the NBA and the NFL and the Major League Baseball, they have their own commissioner. And if you're aware, the commissioner has their own balance sheet. And the commissioner will deploy that balance sheet for any one of those teams based on their needs to ensure that the league continues to move forward. So if you think about where the NBA is moving into next, the foundation is essentially going to play a commissioner's role on behalf of its members, and it will participate in critical moments and times to help drive comfort and exceptions to allow this asset class to advance as quickly as possible, while also seeking the support, let's call it, of the right people who will provide the right types of visibility so that the public capital markets are able to consume this. And hopefully over time, as we continue to iterate, more and more will be put into the market, and this will hopefully continue to increase visibility, liquidity, and all the other things. One more shout out. I see our partners from Sorensen Impact Institute. Just want to give them a shout. They have been incredible in partnering in terms of thinking about how we, from an investment bank and issuing securities, and we do ESG frameworks and impact frameworks all the time, but this is very different. We've got to get it right in terms of what's happening on the ground and how all that data comes back to bring the impact investment universe and the MDI universe, and the Venn diagram piece is what we're seeking. So thank you, Chris.
Man, so I just want to thank Marcus for making my job much, much easier today. Definitely appreciate that. One thing, he talks a lot, but he's also humble in that what most people don't realize about Marcus, and I'm going to brag on my friend here a little bit, at the, 5th largest bank in the country, about $660 billion worth of total assets, he spearheaded and got approval to actually issue racial equity bonds. Racial equity bonds. I think that's worth some applause. Yeah, well done, well done. That's a legacy.
Hold on, my good friend Zoila, I'm gonna throw Zoila under the bus. Zoila was very instrumental in us being able to have the confidence and understand what we were doing when we went to market to do this. I won't share all the backstory, but this all happens in a room within people who have the right intentions. So thank you, Zoila.
Yeah, and that's a great point too. I love that because in some of the conversations we're having that we can't really talk about in too much detail, one of the things we're finding is that there's a need to kind of stay in the lab, to stay in the kitchen with each other, where you have those who are crafting the offering and those who are thinking about purchasing it and having an iterative process. So it's not just a fait accompli, here's the deal, take it or leave it. It's a, what do you need to do in order to make this work? Where do we do nip tuck? What are the impact metrics that you need to see? At the end of the day, we want to get to a place, and we're getting close to a place, where investments in and alongside MDIs are a standard asset class. Right, so just like mortgage-backed securities, affordable housing, it's going to be an asset class that's just part of organizations' portfolios. That's the goal. And I really want to thank the chairman, Robert James, who he's an ex-bond attorney, all right, and so or recovering, or I don't know what the right language is. It's my boss. I'm scared, but we are. Without his insight, his guidance, and his vision, we would never have gotten approval from the rest of the board to do this. We've been authorized to move forward at a pretty significant scale, but we have to have the right partners in the room. And so we're doing something that we hope can establish and maintain a base of support for the MBAF, the MBA, for many years to come. But in this moment of climate, around the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, like with any federal dollars, there are some things you can use the money for and a lot of things you can't use the money for. So what are those gaps? If you're a CDFI bank, you can start applying come Q1 of next year. You can start applying, finding your projects, sending them to the Justice Climate Fund, who has $940 million. In Q1, they're going to start Wave 1, which is going to offer between 100 and 150 million in funding. Part of that's for projects, part of that's for technical assistance. If you're not a CDFI certified MDI, you better file for your CDFI certification. However, using structures like what we're talking about, impact investments, partnerships with philanthropy and investors, we can create other pools of capital that can also help accelerate the journey of those banks that are not CDFI certified. Right? We have partners in this room that we can collaborate with to scale up the early transactions, right? So not to undersell what we're doing, but it's going to be at a certain level. The decimal point is going to be in a certain place. Once we've proven this out with our partners, we're going to go talk to bigger folks and move that decimal point over. And that's the goal, right? To get to a place where it's a standard asset class and it's operating at that institutional scale of hundreds of millions of dollars in transactions, connecting investors to communities through MDIs for justice, right? So I know we've got just about 6 minutes left. I know we put out a whole lot of information, and I would love to, while we have these folks, leaders in the field, provide you all with an opportunity to ask some questions. We got big brains, big hearts, clear eyes, what do they say? Anyway. Yeah, so any questions? Mr. Chairman.
I have a question. So break it down. What's the practical, give us a couple of practical uses that MDIs would be able to actualize this funding. Because I know, Chris, you're going to make it work. You're going to get the bonds issued. You, Marcus, Zoila, the group here is going to get these bonds issued. You're going to have the proceeds. How do the bond proceeds directly benefit an MDI? Give us a few quick examples.
You want to talk about comfort and exceptions?
Yeah, so again, this is not baked in, so hopefully I won't trip on anything, but really quickly, because I want to make sure that Ray and Zoila are also able to share some additional thoughts. Again, like I said, assume that once those proceeds come back to the MBA, it's going to sit in essentially a private lending capacity. So it's basically just going to be a private loan fund, and that private loan fund is going to be 100% directed directly to MDIs. So it's going to be a potential direct lending opportunity to be used in a variety of ways for ultimately these green lending projects. But again, it's an interesting vehicle because it's basically a private credit fund, right? So it's not going to be restricted or beholden to certain other challenges. It's going to be able to come into transactions, particularly those that are more challenging, and be that first loss or be that comfort and exceptions piece. And again, this is back to, and I'm not trying to implicate anyone on stage, but the concept of foundations considering these opportunities. They have the ability to take the risk if the risk is being taken with the right partner into the right opportunity. I guess I do talk too much. So the long story short is it's a sidecar, Robert, to the question, and it's going to act side by side with the MDI members exclusively for your needs. Now, those needs are all going to obviously be project related and so on and so forth, but again, it's additional capital and capacity. The plan over time is to also bring in other GGRF money that's going directly into projects so that there's actually a coordinated effort to be able to build the pipelines that some of you are building, but understand how to originate to distribute as well so it doesn't all just sit on your balance sheet.
Yeah, look, there are multiple things that I think could work. Just in brief, what we're able to do is mitigate risk because we've got different pools of capital, and I was telling you we don't seek major returns or anything. So if you've got a major project and you say, wow, there's a risk area here, could we have some capital come in, or you need bridge money to come in, we can design a facility very easily that can fit, and we have the kind of people that can do the financial engineering that would work. I just want to put a plug that we're doing a Southern initiative starting next year. So we have a particular appetite for working with institutions in the U.S. South, the Black Belt, places like that. So we're going to be seeking people out, and you'll hear about us moving through different markets, and we're partnering with some others in foundations. So we're going to pool some of that capital and do basic problem solving, which is what I like to do. If you have an opportunity or a problem, let's sit down and figure it out. So you don't have to figure out all the inner workings, of a foundation because it's too much jargon. So it's like, look, I've got something here. What do you think? And that's what I like when I say the how part of it. And you've got something, and then I've got the people that will sit with you. Last thing on the power thing, one of the big issues with, and one of the reasons why philanthropy has not been there as a partner is not only the issue of not being aware of minority deposit institutions, but there is back to the issue of power because you've got gatekeeping and who controls. So I can tell you just personally from my organization, Nathan Cummings, when I arrived, where power sits. You have investment committees, you all know about those, and you've got trustees, the directors of the entity, you've got the CEO, but then you have the investment professionals, and they're often called the chief investment officers. And so let's just say I replace mine. We have a unicorn that's overseeing the money, meaning it is two black firms came together. That is a unicorn in philanthropy. When I selected them 3 years ago, they only had assets under management of 1.5 billion. Today it's 5.7 billion. And so they're continuing to grow. So they're a runaway success, Vivian West Fuller. And I see it as part of my goal for impact that they aggregate more capital. So when people approach us, it's not just the resources that I have, it's the resources that they're managing. So it's billions. And so we've been working on different deals together, and sometimes I might come up with a grant to add to something that they're doing, which is pooling other forms of capital. So just look at it as very friendly capital. We can play with others, and we can solve unique problems.
Yeah, Ray, thank you for that. And Zoila, you were just, I think, one of the most brilliant people in philanthropy. Really appreciate the work that you're doing, and please, if you could help close us out.
That's a lot of pressure. I would say, I think to the question, For me, it's not about changing anything or like doing anything new. It's about just supporting MDIs to do the things that they were doing. Ray at Texas National was talking about 100% LTV loans. And when often we try to push CDFIs and MDIs to like take on more risk, to like meet communities where they are, they're like, okay, well, fund us that way. Like, you take the recourse, don't give me the recourse. And so I think for me, this is more about like, how can we capitalize MDIs in a different way so that you guys can do your job. And so one of the things I didn't mention that we did early on when our team got started is we got rated by S&P and Moody's. We have a $13 billion balance sheet. We didn't want to take on debt, but what we do want to do is use that balance sheet in order to help institutions aggregate capital. And that's kind of the question, is like, how can we use the power of our balance sheet, back to power, our AAA rating, in order to help you get better capital. Yes, AAA stable. Get you better rated. Get you the capital that you need to use our rating, to leverage our rating. And the fact is that is a pretty simple thing to do, to be able to put up our balance sheet, because going back to perceptions of risk, we believe that MDIs are good risk to take.
Yeah, well, thank you all so much for that. The importance of having an investment grade rating that they're willing to put to use for other people and for the mission and pursuit of justice, I think is very powerful. So please join me in thanking.
Thank you, Chris.
Join me in thanking all of these folks for being a part of this important conversation and the work that we're doing. More to come. We'll keep you posted.